Naam, barabara kabisa mpenzi mtazamaji. Bila shaka hii ni runinga uipendayo ya KDR, ikiwa tunapeperusha matangazo yetu ya moja kwa moja kutoka hapa nchini Kenya na kule ughaibuni. Naam, hapo jana baadhi ya viongozi walioteuliwa na Rais William Samoei Ruto wakiongozwa na Musalia Mudavadi, hapo jana walihojiwa mbele ya bunge la kitaifa linaloongozwa na Mheshimiwa Moses Masika Wetangula, spika wa bunge la kitaifa. Na baadhi ya viongozi ambao pia vile vile walihojiwa hapo jana alikuwa ni pamoja na Mheshimiwa Aden Dugis Duale ambaye anapendekezwa kuwa waziri wa ulinzi, na pia vile vile Mheshimiwa Halis Wahome, Mheshimiwa Justin Muturi pia ambaye pia angependekezwa kuwa mwanasheria mkuu wa taifa la Kenya. Na hivi leo ikiwa ni siku ya pili, mahali ambapo tutawachukua moja kwa moja hadi kwenye bunge la kitaifa, mahali ambapo tunaarifiwa kwamba Mheshimiwa Kithure Kindiki ambaye angependekezwa kuwa waziri wa usalama wa ndani ameanza tayari kuhojiwa na wabunge wakiongozwa na Mheshimiwa Moses Wetangula ambaye ni spika wa bunge la kitaifa. Moja kwa moja hadi kwenye bunge la kitaifa. Langu jina ni Omari Musa.
500,000 shillings, was I paid? Yes. By out of the box? No. By Onesmus Kipchumba Murkomen, who owed me a friendly loan of 500,000 shillings, because at that time we were borrowing money from each other, which happens among colleagues. I'm sure even these MPs, they owe each other some money. So that is the short story around that issue. Mr. Chairman, on the final issue on the running mate, the question raised by the member for Matungulu, Kathiani, or Matungulu this side, Kathiani this side. Now, first, it is not true that I fought so hard to be a running mate. That is not true. What is true, Mr. Chairman, is that I was fortunate to be on the short list of 6 members of my party who were being considered to be running mates for President William Ruto. In that short list, it is also true that I ended up being a runners-up. It is also true that in that process, the Honorable Rigathi Gachagua, who is now Deputy President of Kenya, was nominated to be a running mate, and I was the runners-up. That bit is true. With regard to the question whether I've recovered from the shock, there was no shock, because in the first instance, there was no entitlement to anything. You can only get shocked if you are entitled to something. It was a privilege even to be on that short list, and even a greater privilege to have been a runners-up. It is also true, Chairman, that I did a press conference 2 days later after that process, and I said 2 things, namely that I'll take a break from elective politics, which I did, and 2, that I will not be available for any appointive office during my break. That last bit, I have since reviewed that position after persuasion by my party. My party persuaded me, and in fact, if the honorable member cared to listen to that speech, I said, however, notwithstanding my personal decision, if my party wishes to engage me and requires me to reconsider my position, I'll be willing to listen. So that is what made me to change my mind. Otherwise, it is true what he has said, but there was no shock. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I have no problem submitting to authority. That is the easiest thing. And therefore, my friend Rigathi Gachagua, who is now the Deputy President of Kenya, is my boss. And I have no problem whatsoever working with him and under him, together with President Uhuru Kenyatta, together with President William Ruto. Uhuru Kenyatta is the former president of Kenya. I also served under him very well until he threw me out for no reason. So I'll be more than happy to serve under President William Ruto Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, all my colleagues, all arms of government, and I'll be a humble servant of Kenya, the people of Kenya, and there is no shock, there is no nothing. There is nothing even to discuss.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
The next batch of 4, Owen Bayer, Shurie, Naisula, and Gikaria.
The Speaker, it's possible to clarify, clarify
Yes.
something that the Honorable Professor Kindiki Kithure had raised. Actually, the fact is that the 500,000 shillings was through a check drawn by Singoei, Murkomen, and Sigei advocates to the law firm of Kithure Kindiki and Associates.
And the data was Kipchumba Murkomen.
And the 15 million, just to clarify further, was in favor of Singoei, Murkomen, and Sigei advocates. But the company was one which was dealing with the two companies, with the two law firms. The out-of-the-box solutions is the company which was at the center of the investigations. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
I think it is.
No, sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Debate.
So if you
hold
just
on, Professor.
1 second, because I think if you allow me,
Yes.
that clarification by the Honorable Pio and I is extremely important. I have said before this committee chairman, I had a relationship, a debtor-creditor relationship with the Honorable Kipchumba Murkomen. He paid me using a check. Where he got the money or who has paid him, I don't know. I have never known. I will never know. That should be what goes on record.
What is on record is that the Honorable Pio and I has recanted the 15 million payment, and he has
Without saying so.
And he has made it clear that it was a payment to a firm that has nothing to do with you. Yes. Isn't that so, Pio?
Actually, that's the position. That's the position, yes.
Let the chips rest where they fell.
All right, thank you very much, Mr.
Shurie,
Speaker.
Naisula, and Gikaria.
Thank you very much, Mr.
One
Speaker.
question each.
Okay, and Chair, Professor Kithure Kindiki, you have very well said that you're going to be a very humble but very firm CS if approved, which I appreciate. I also want to take the line that my boss here has said, that the former ministers have been very powerful. But I want you to choose to be a helpful minister, not really a powerful minister, and a facilitative, not a frustrative like we have had before. But within that context, please give us what is your vision for this Minister of Interior and National Administration, and what is your strategy? What do you want to achieve for the betterment of this country? On that line, Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the nominee. The chiefs in this country have been facilitated by wazee wa vijiji and wazee wa nyumba kumi, and they have been effective because of this lot. But the previous administration refused to recognize the wazee wa vijiji and wazee wa nyumba kumi in law, and refused to remunerate them. And they live as paupers, but they're very helpful within the mainstream administration. What is your vision? Are you going to get them paid, recognized, or are you going to refuse to do so like your predecessor did? I brought a bill to Parliament to try to pay them, but your predecessor refused. Are you going to pay wazee wa vijiji? Are you going to recognize them in law so that they can continue to do the good job that they are doing? I thank you.
Shurie.
Thank you, Chair. Bwana nominee, there's questions which have been asked about the long and tedious procedure of vetting persons from border communities when they seek identification and travel documents. How do you plan to facilitate access by all Kenyans to these crucial documents that are a constitutional right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
We should emulate that batch. Naisola. follow suit with one question.
Thank you, Chair, but I'll request for your indulgence because what I'm about to ask is something that I know many of us share in this committee. And I constantly get the feeling that office holders responsible with matters security don't really understand or even are willing to comprehend the pain and losses caused by insecurity in the North. Cattle rustling is seen as a tradition and a people's backward culture. Kindly allow me to put this into context, and actually I pray for God's strength as I present this. Just yesterday, when I was undertaking this very important national duty, I received a text that criminals from my neighboring constituency, that is Tiati, ambushed herders, injured one person, and drove away with cattle. As if that was not enough, the criminals continue to be bolder by the day. This morning, they attacked again. As we speak, they have killed one person. 2 people are missing, one who is actually my staff, and they've stolen goods. On a normal day as a leader, I would have dropped everything, including this assignment, and rushed to my constituency to condole, bury, and have local security meetings. Then back to Nairobi, go to OP, we get a chopper, we go for security meetings, and we come back to Nairobi. Calm is restored, then reiteration attacks, most likely from my community, will take place, and the cycle continues. And this is the daily life of a typical pastoralist living along the border of another pastoralist county. The only time as a country we behave shocked or surprised is when we lose our security personnel, and only when we lose more than 2 or 3 lives. When will one life be too many to lose in the northern parts of this country? It should never be lost to us that at one point we lost over 42 police officers, and the only thing we have to show in Baragoi is a monument with the names of these fallen heroes. As a leader, I don't run away from my responsibility and have been consistent and diligent. But, nominee, I am tired. I am honestly tired. And Kenyans are tired. What do you intend to do differently from your predecessors, away from the usual rhetoric and threats? Perhaps you need to come and live in Kurkur, Pora, Longewan, Losuk, incognito for only 1 week. Come and stay there. What strategy or are your thoughts do you have to end this menace once and for all, so that as a leader I can execute my other national duties and not concern myself only on matters security? Thank you.
Thank you. Gikaria, Professor, I've allowed that emotional discourse because of the peculiar circumstances of the member. Gikaria.
Thank you, Chair.
One question.
Pongezi Kindiki.
Owen Bayer, switch off your microphone, please.
The question that I have, Honorable Kindiki, is that Kenya Kwanza Manifesto acknowledges that ensuring safe, secure, and fair environment through democratic policing, which contributes to development. What measures will you put in place to revive community policing initiative in urban areas and restore the public trust in the National Police Service? And I'm saying this because at the same time, maybe you can give us what constitutes a criminal gang that is supposed to be, to be banned, you know, like these criminal gangs. In my place now, there is a gang called Confirm, and it is really bringing a lot of insecurity issues within the. So what would be required for that group to be, not to be confirmed, to be, you know, declared illegal, such that we can restore peace and order in Nakuru at large? Thank you.
Professor, those are 4. You can respond.
Thank you, Chair. On the first one, I promise to the nation and to the House, to this committee, that I will do what the Honorable Baya has recommended, which is to be a helpful and facilitative minister on this very sensitive docket. My vision is to transform the national government administrative structure, NGAO, from a structure which has the amenability for misuse by politicians and leaders, to increasingly allow this very useful structure to concentrate on its mandate, which is to sensitize the public on government programs, mobilize the public on important national issues, and actually be agents, the agents of government for service delivery and citizen empowerment. That is the vision I have for this cadre. It can be done, it will be done. I also envisage a difficult project of trying to improve the relationship between our police service and citizens, because there has been over the years broken relationship and trust deficit between the police and the public. And some of the reasons for that trust deficit, some of the reasons are actually beyond the control of the police officers themselves. The poor terms and conditions, the lack of facilitation at the service delivery points. For example, you have over 600 police stations without a penny in terms of AIE. You want that OCS to arrest a suspect, it is up to that OCS to feed the suspect and take them to court. You want a DCI officer to record a statement, they do not have money even to buy a notepad or a pen. So some of the things we blame the police officers for are actually caused by lack of a working environment that is suitable for delivery of services. So I intend also, in line with the Kenya Kwanza bottom-up model of delivery of services, to use the police station as the service delivery point and work from there upwards, as opposed to relying only on the top commanders in terms of trying to understand the working environment in which our police officers work. With regard to Nyumba Kumi, I am a firm believer that this is a very critical organ within our security architecture. The kind of requests that have been presented by this cadre are very modest, actually, including 500 shillings for 2 meetings a week. That's 1,000 shillings a week. It can even be 2 meetings a month. And using the budget that is already available, we can cut down on non-core expenditure and make sure we deploy some of the resources to be able to appreciate this very critical cadre, which is at the bottom of the pyramid of our security architecture. With regard to community policing, Honorable Gikaria, I agree that there are a number of organized gangs in many of the urban centers in our country, with some form of permanence, organization, and command structure. And therefore, perhaps those are details we need to share so that we can, if there is a consistency, and these elements exist in the people committing those crimes in Nakuru, we can be able to support you and the people of Nakuru to make sure that we get rid of these people. With regard to the last issue on cattle rustling, I agree with the Honorable Naisula. The Honorable Naisula speaks on behalf of about 67% of Kenya's territory, the Kenya of the North. The Kenya of the North includes the North Rift, Northeastern, parts of Tana River, and some parts of the coastal strip fall in that category. A territory that is largely facing very serious insecurity. And allow me just to address the issue of banditry in the North Rift. I have been instructed, subject to this approval process, to make sure that we deal with banditry once and for all in the North Rift. Therefore, what am I going to do? I'll not be sharing operational issues here, but one of the challenges we have is the lack of operational capability for our officers who are serving in those areas. I have requested for facilitation so that we are able to improve the existing capabilities both for air and land mobility, but also for protection of officers to ensure that they keep the peace there and deal with that issue. We will also have to invoke the provisions of the Constitution and the National Police Service Act to ensure that we actually energize the community policing program to make sure that we don't just rely on soldiers, on officers who are just posted there and they do not even understand this terrain. So that the community helps the officers to be able to track the criminals, and in the meantime, as we venture in that collaborative community policing initiative, in the meantime, you allow us to do what the law says should happen to criminals. And I would not want to say further than that for now, except that I am instructed to ensure that the banditry problem is resolved once and for all. I assure Kenyans, and I assure this committee, that I will make whatever sacrifices that are required to be made. I will stay focused until this problem is over. Even if it means, Honorable Naisula, coming to live in the North Rift. Not for a week, not for a month. We will stay there as long as it is necessary. Because, Honorable Speaker, when criminals, bandits, castle rustlers, terrorists, when they don't fear government, as Honorable Naisula has said, that culture that they raid today, they raid tomorrow, they kill police officers, they kill civilians, when that culture permits, then the legitimacy of the state is at stake. So we'll do whatever it takes. As soon as I take office, the #1 assignment is to ensure we set free this country from criminals, from bandits, terrorists, and cattle rustlers, not through press conferences. We will speak less because security does not require speaking. But I also want to assure the nation, the Honorable Chairman, we will follow the law. We will respect the Constitution. We will respect all the international human rights and humanitarian treaties that are part of the law of Kenya. But we will still do the job, because in some of the most secure countries, ruthlessness with criminals is matched with the respect for human rights. So law-abiding citizens don't have anything to fear. There will be no extrajudicial killings. There will be no abuse of human rights. But we will do to criminals what needs to be done for them under both national and international law.
The next batch of Shuria's question on issuance of travel documents. I think it says you didn't answer that.
Yes, I think the Honorable Shuria, the issue of, particularly the issue of vetting in northern Kenya, is not a requirement of the law, it's an administrative measure. In light of the need to respect fundamental rights and freedoms and make sure that there is no discrimination, we will increasingly review the procedures for vetting to make them human rights friendly and friendly to the citizens of Kenya. But in the long term, Honorable Chairman, the long-term solution for that vetting problem, which is a bit uncomfortable, I must say, but is necessary, is when the country will adopt a unique identifier number at birth. An attempt was made under the Vision 2030, under the IPRS project, which was abandoned, and then the Huduma bill came and took over some of that effort and brought confusion. Some of the matters are in court. But the moment you are able to have a unique identifier number at birth, then you will not need to be vetted by anybody, because government will have the record of every child, every person born in Kenya. So the idea of vetting will go in the long term. But in the short term, please, we must secure our borders, and there are many ethnic consanguinities and relationships, especially in the north, with other ethnicities in neighboring countries. So it's not supposed to be a punishment on Kenyans. It's just meant to ensure that at least we secure our borders and make sure that we protect the Kenyan population. We will ease that and make it human rights friendly. Eventually, that has to go when that project on an integrated population registration system is complete.
Posing Emase Raso Koech.
I thank you, Honorable Chair, for giving me this golden opportunity.
Everybody will ask a question, so don't worry.
For giving me, Mr. Chair, this golden opportunity. And Professor Kindiki, the nominee, if this committee sees it fit to approve you, and the House definitely then agrees with the committee, if that happens, you are coming at a very interesting time. Very interesting time, Professor Kindiki, when this country is facing myriads of threats in terms of insecurity. But allow me to ask you, Professor Kindiki, what new thing will Kenyans be expecting from you, and particularly from the area you say 67% of the place, and no thrift, and specifically where I come from? I can feel Honorable Lesuda. But let me ask you, Honorable Professor, the government has been using this approach called operation, which now I have, from my own study, I have renamed it extrajudicial killing. And I'm talking from a community, Honorable Professor and Honorable Chair, that has suffered this extrajudicial killing. But they name it operation so that it looks good. It looks accepted to be meted on a community like Pokot. Honorable Chair, you can remember. The worst one was in 1984, where almost 25% of Pokot were exterminated through that operation. Honorable Chair, through the same strategy operation. The worst, and the latest was 2015, 2016, when people were massacred, abducted, never seen Professor Kindiki up to today, never seen. No question asked. And even the worst, Honorable Chair, it's going on now in Tiati. People are missing. People are getting lost in the name of operation. Because that kind of community, Professor, has been profiled for many years. And therefore, they have become like the bunching back, or it is true to do an operation in West Pokot. So you wake up, and in fact, that might be your measure, performance contract. If the first thing, you hit. So Professor Kindiki, these are people of Kenya. They have suffered. What new thing will you bring, Honorable Kindiki?
Thank you.
Finally, Chair.
More than your bite.
Finally, Chair.
Yes.
The normal norm in Kenya is, if you want to become a police in recruitment, you must pay money to be recruited. That is the critical and biggest issue, Honorable Chair, if you allow me, that Professor Kindiki, knowing his background, must come and deal with it, Honorable Chair, so that people can feel they can be recruited fairly without selling land. I thank you, Chair.
Emase?
Thank you, Chair. My concern to the nominee is on addiction and alcohol abuse. Addiction and alcohol abuse is on the rise, and it is a crisis. So my question is, what are you going to do to address this menace? The issue of narcotic drugs. How are you going to manage to tackle the issue of trafficking of drugs? And Chair, just allow me to echo the issue on IDs, because I come from a border constituency, that is Teso South. If you're going to Uganda, members will pass through my constituency. I welcome you. And our men have married from Uganda, from the diaspora. So I have a situation where we have grandmothers. These ladies were married 20 years ago, 50. Up to today, they're being treated as foreigners. They cannot own property. They cannot get IDs. This process is so tedious, it is long, and I will be following, assuming we approve you, I think that's an area I'll be following up on you to see whether it can be improved so that these women can be recognized. So that they can own IDs and they can own property and they can enjoy all other services as Kenyans. Thank you.
Russell.
Thank you very much, Chair. Professor, if the House approves your nomination, you'll be the first lawyer who will be sitting in Interior. That in itself will be a history. In Kenya, there are two laws that are operating. One law is in the 67% that you talked about, and the other law operates in the remainder of the country. What the honorable members from the pastoralist communities have raised are far-reaching. It is about the exclusion of those communities who live in ASAL areas, whether they are ID cards, whether they are cattle rustling, whether they are killings, whether they are inappropriate application of the law. So my question to you, because Interior is the anchor around which Kenya moves, but more and more we see that the problem is not even in Pokot, it's not in Marsabit, Isiolo, or Garissa. The problem is in the office, which fortunately you might occupy. How do you intend to go about in making Kenyans feel that they are in a unitary state and they enjoy equal opportunity as Kenyans? Thank you, Chair.
Professor, mine will be on professionalization of our security agencies and provincial administration. We did go with you to many parts of this country where your predecessor will use the provincial administration to scatter our rallies, use the chiefs to execute political errands, thus making the provincial administration untidy. The Constitution 2010 has a place for the provincial administration and the politicians. What will you do different from your predecessor?
Thank you. Professor, those are 4.
Thank you. Let me start with the last one. The President has already pronounced publicly that it is not the intention of this administration to use national government administration officers or police officers to do politics. Taking cue from that pronouncement, which is as it should anyway, we, and I can say subject to the approval by this House, will refrain from interfering in any way whatsoever with the decision-making independence and operational independence of the police, but at the same time, I'll refrain from giving any instructions to the national government administration officers to facilitate the politics of any political party, including Kenya Kwanza, because that is against the Public Officer Ethics Act. It is also against the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Act. It is unethical for a member of the National Government Administration Office to support the activities or the political activities of a political party, and to use the instruments that are supposed to be used to protect citizens and their property to propagate the political activities of any political party. With regard to the issue of cultural lasting again, which has been repeated by the Honorable Kosing, one, there is need for enhanced capability. You remember in 1996, this country lost a district commissioner, Mr. James Nyandoro, when the helicopter he was flying, as he was trying to track cattle which had been stolen in Turkana, was shot down by bandits. When I talk about capability, I mean the need to modernize the armed personnel carriers, both land and air carriers, because the kind of carriers that require to get criminals out of the caves and gorges are the type that cannot fall under the fire of these bandits. I know a case has been made that violence is not an option, and I agree. But it's one of the options. It's one of the options. It's not the only option, but it's the one of the options, because what language are you going, what discussion are you going with a criminal who has stolen 100 cows from an innocent person and is hiding in a gorge? What is he doing in a gorge in the first place? So you flatten the gorge to start with. Then now you can, because what is he doing in a gorge with people's livestock? So that is one of the issues, the issue around capability, including personal protection of the young officers that we send sometimes, and even the more experienced ones. I've seen a GSO officer was shot the other day, somewhere in Baringo, shot dead in the line of duty. And then, so some force has to be used. But I have also assured the nation we'll follow the law. The Honorable Didaraso is right. I am a lawyer, and not just a lawyer. I'm a human rights lawyer. That's what I trained in. Even the most established democracies must use violence to protect 99% of its citizens against the 1% that want to destroy our democracy, period. I have no apologies to make about this. That is the law. We will respect human rights. There will be no extrajudicial killings, but criminals have to be faced as criminals, period. And crimes have no ethnicity. Crimes are not political. Even if a politician is committing a crime, he's a criminal. A lawyer committing a crime is a criminal. A doctor committing a crime is a criminal. and they belong to no ethnicity. But I also agree there are other methods that have not been used maximally before, like community policing, like enhancing the capability of Kenya Police Reservice, most of whom were disarmed in the north, remunerating them so that also these KPR, again, don't get tempted to misuse those firearms because they are hungry, and also other interventions, including a Marshall Plan. The ultimate solution to setting free the Kenya of the North from the hands of criminals is a Marshall Development Plan of infrastructure, electricity, roads, hospitals, schools, etc. And that is in the Kenya Kwanza Plan. So I'll be collaborating with the other agencies to make sure that as we deal with the criminals, we are also opening up that area so that it is easy to convince even those who have been socialized to believe that only crime can give them a livelihood, the alternative livelihoods that can help them feed their children. Finally, very quickly on NACADA, there is a process which is ongoing about enhancing the control aspects on alcohol and narcotic drugs. My 1 second take of how else we can improve this is to use the education curriculum review that is taking place through a task force now to see how we can just try and resocialize our children, because the drug addiction menace has cascaded to very young sectors of our population, and only the education system, which is the software that instills positive moral values, can perhaps be used even as we enhance the control of these substances among our population. And from the Honorable Emase, the issue of spouses and citizenship is one of the reform measures which I am informed is already ongoing, to make sure that there are no delays. If the principal spouse, for example, has citizenship, the other spouse application should not delay, and so forth and so on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Point of information, Honorable Chair. Point of information.
Who do you want to inform?
I want to inform the nominee.
Okay.
It's fundamental, Honorable Chair, at the level. Maybe I wanted to inform the nominee, Honorable Chair, of an experience which you and I know, what was done in Uganda by President Museveni to pacify one of the worst areas called Karamoja areas. When Museveni took over, Honorable Chair, you know that. He has pacified the entire place without using this extrajudicial killing. And if you go down to that side from Moroto, Amudat, that is where, of course, our community live, you rarely see anybody with a gun. But if you had to go there, maybe 1980s, everybody had a gun. What happened in Uganda is not happening in Kenya, Honorable. So that's information, Honorable Chair, that I want to share with the nominee, now that also Uganda is our friends, that he can also enjoy that information from Uganda. I thank you.
Yes. Ferdinand Mishi Daud Amisi. Yes, Honorable Raso.
Thank you, Chairman. I believe the good professor did not answer my question to my satisfaction, particularly in application of the law, that there are two laws that are operating in this country. The laws of some parts, the 40% of the country, and the 60%. And that is why the honorable members from the arid and semi-arid lands have raised very heavy issues on this floor.
I thought he said that he acknowledges persistent and consistent discrimination of people living in the north, and that it's going to be his duty to make sure that this becomes part of our history. He didn't say those words, but that's how I understood him. Is that so, Professor?
That is so, and I said because many of them are administrative measures, they are not legal measures, we will sit down with the leaders and communities to see how we can make them more human rights friendly, but I did caution that some of these measures are critical to secure our borders, but they should not be used to punish citizens. So increasingly, no person from any part of Kenya should feel being treated differently. And so I will be seeking the support and counsel from the leadership from these areas to see what can be improved without hurting critical aspects of national security.
The next batch of 4, Ferdinand, Mishi, Daud, and Amisi, all honorable members of the committee. Each members.
I want to, on the behalf of the police service, National Police Service, ask you a question about the review of their terms of service. I think they have been complaining that poorly enumerated, and that's why I think some of them are involved in the bribes and, of course, the killings that you see. What do you intend to do on their terms of service and particularly the payments? Thank you.
Thank you. Mishi.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, first on a rider on Emase's questions, I'd like to ask the nominee that how are you going to do to destroy the cartels and the syndicates in the police forces who collude with drug barons? And my question will be on the small arms. Honorable Speaker, I understand Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda created the Regional Center on Small Arms in the Great Lake region. And they also established Nairobi Protocol with the aim of ensuring that they reduce illicit small arms proliferation in the country. But despite that, what we have witnessed in this country, that any Dick and Harry, anybody who wants to access firearms, he can access those arms. And that is why we have rampant insecurity in this country. What measures are you going to put in place to ensure that only those people who are authorized and they seek permission from the relevant department in the ministry, in the relevant ministry, that they can access firearms so that we can reduce insecurity in this country? I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Mishi. Amisi. Oh, sorry, Dawood first.
Thank you, Chair, Mr. Speaker. To the nominee, Professor Kindiki, the previous administration established a lot of sub-counties or districts, locations, and boundaries have been an issue between many counties, between my county and your county, Professor Kindiki, as well as counties in Nyanza and Rift Valley. And because the docket of the districts and the boundaries would squarely fall under your administration, under the national administration, how are you going to handle the boundaries issue, as well as personnel for the new districts and locations, which were created, especially even in my constituency, more than 5 or 7 years back, and we still chiefs, and many places in Meru County and in Kenya in general do not have the sub-county DCCs and ACCs deployed. So that's what I want to ask. I know between our counties, you were in one of the meetings together with the governors and the members of parliament regarding the boundary issue between Tharaka, Nithi, and Meru County. I want to know how you will handle this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Amisi?
Thank you, Chair. The issue of refugees, you've written articles on refugees. I saw it somewhere. And the repatriation of refugees and closing of Dadaab refugee camp was a hot topic in the previous regime. How are you going to handle it going forward? Are you going to revise the decision that was made before in regard to that? Influx of foreign nationals is also a big issue here in Kenya, where We are going towards regional blocks, East African Community expanding, African Free Trade, African Continental Free Trade area. We are opening up our borders too much, and in long run, we are going to be overflown. To remember what has happened in South Africa because of opening up borders, then you start having xenophobic attacks to foreigners. Close related to that, the NHIF of the police officers has been
these ones, and for especially the prison officers who are always complaining, and they don't have trade unions to complain on their behalf.
Another 4, you can answer those.
Thank you, Chairman. Within the Kenya Kwanza manifesto to review the terms of service for the police officers, and some of the complaints that the officers make about their working conditions are actually right, they are correct, they are justified. So we shall be looking at how to handle that within the resource constraints of the country and also within the independence and mandate of the Salaries and Remunerations Commission. But one way of even achieving some of the things that the non-benefit aspects of welfare is by reviewing the ministry's existing budget to remove non-core expenditure and deploying that expenditure to facilitate officers to protect our country, to protect our people and their property. With regard to cartels and drug barons, the Cabinet Secretary provides policy direction to the National Police Service and the other formations under the ministry. Through this oversight, which is provided in law, we will make sure that no protection is afforded to any officer or any person who is associated with drug cartels and drug barons. So we are going to perform our duty to provide the policy oversight on our forces. Because when the instructions and policy direction come from the top, it's easier to manage than when there is none. With regard to proliferation of small arms and light weapons, I would like to respond as follows. That one, we may have to review and look at the framework for licensing of firearms in this country to ensure that the right people are the people who are licensed to carry firearms. Secondly, with regard to firearms already in possession of, in the hands of criminals, we will have to review our policy on disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration to ensure that we mop out firearms in the wrong hands. And this is associated with the program that we discussed earlier in this session about how to ensure that we pacify and make it peaceful in most of the countries where bandits are reigning supreme. With regard to sub-counties, all sub-counties, locations, sub-locations which have already been established by law should have personnel. So I'll be sitting with all leaders who are representing areas which have this kind of needs, and this will be something that we'll implement with immediate effect so long as a sub-county has been gazetted in accordance with the law and the locations and sub-locations have been created in accordance with the established procedure. With regard to boundaries, the Constitution of 2010 froze the review of boundaries and applied the Districts and Provinces Act of 1992. But the Constitution also in Article 188 requires a review of boundaries, county boundaries, through a process which is independent from the electoral and boundaries process. So some of these historical issues will be resolved through that way. But in the meantime, the struggles around boundaries are normally struggles that are fueled by political leaders. What I know from my experience as a leader is that there are genuine grievances among citizens about ownership of property. And therefore, the ongoing reforms on the land information management system that will provide the cadastre of the entire country will help remove these issues on who owns which property, because there are some people with title deeds on top of other people's property. The Ministry of Lands has just completed the cadastre for Nairobi City. I have been fortunate to see that cadastre, and you'll be shocked, people owning plots on roundabouts, on top of people's buildings, and inside Karura Forest. So once this cadastre process, and the Kenya Kwanza, the executive order signed by the President on 12th of October, has already identified this area of land information management, rolling out of these limbs and the preparation of the national cadastre as one of the reforms that will be taken across the country, so that you know where your property is and nobody has a title deed on top of somebody else's farm. But the boundaries issue will have to be resolved in accordance with Article 188 of the Constitution and in accordance with the Districts and Provinces Act of 1992. Finally, on the issue of refugees, the traditional methods of providing durable solutions to the refugee problem, namely voluntary repatriation, local integration, and resettlement to third countries, the ministry will pursue them a little more robustly, especially considering genuine cases of local integration for refugees who have lived in this country for 40, 50 years and are not under any negative security profile. There is no need of sending somebody home who was born here and is 55 years old. He's going home, he's going to a country just to die. He's going to a country of his death as opposed to a country where he has lived all his life. But we'll couple this with the resettlement and as well as voluntary repatriation for those who want to voluntarily return to their countries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll now give the floor to the Honorable Mukami, Morugara, and Mule, and Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Chair. The nominee, Professor Kindiki, congratulations. Professor, Kenya has been experienced numerous disasters in the past, ranging from bomb blast, terror attacks, floods, collapsing of buildings, to name but a few. Whenever this happens, it only confirms lack of preparedness. Despite having a national emergency response unit, as the cabinet secretary in charge of this unit, what measures will you put in place to raise the level of preparedness to respond effectively to the emergency and national disaster? And finally, through the chair, Professor Kindiki, you come from our region. Our children, our future generation, are getting finished because of alcohol. I don't know what you are going to do, and I am praying if God give you this chance to serve as a cabinet minister, I'm praying, kindly try, if you go to our schools and in the surrounding areas, our children are finished. Thank you, Professor Kindiki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You are a voter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, it's the voters who have sent me to him to ask these questions on their behalf, and they are listening.
You're entitled to one.
No. This, you have to indulge me because of, but I'll be very fast in asking these questions. Number one, it's from the border riders, the school bus drivers, and everybody. It is welcome that you are going to improve the terms of service of the police officers, including their remuneration and housing. However, we know as a matter of fact that on every road, these officers do erect illegal road tolls, roadblocks, and stops so that they can extort money from poor citizens of the country, including border riders. What will you do as the minister, and as soon as you have improved these terms, to end that corruption which happens, what are you going to do to ensure that we do not hear of these illegal roadblocks and tolls, etc., etc.? Number two, the police officers themselves are asking. We have a huge shortage of police officers in the country. The ratio is possibly 1 to 6,000 persons, which is not acceptable because the world standards are about 1 to 300 people. Do you have any plans whatsoever to increase the number of police officers in the country so that security per person is enhanced? From the area managers, this is their question, because I took a petition for them to Parliament. It was passed, but that was the end of it, and now you're going to be on this seat. The smallest unit of administration in the country is actually the village. This is where we find a person called the area manager, who is supposed to be the president of that village. This person executes all manner of duties, including is the security officer, he is the judge, the jury, and the executioner. He is also the divorce court in the village. He's the one to whom people fall to when they want to divorce or they want to remarry or whatever. Do you plan in the administrative system that we are now going to review to start with the village as the basic unit of administration, and what plans will you implement to ensure these people are actually remunerated? Thank you.
Thank you. They also reconcile couples. It's not just about divorce and marriage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Being the last to talk to the nominee, Professor, you are inheriting a service, and especially the police service, whereby internationally on the police corruption index, as a country from the highest corrupt country, which I will not name, we are number 10 at the index of 7.88, and the ratio of police officers in Kenya per population is 1 police officer serving almost between 800 to 1,000, whereas the international norms, where Kenya has signed to be part and parcel, runs from 1 police officer to about 300 to 450. Professor, it is important to have a view of this as you take up this most important docket. If you are approved by this House, there are several scenarios. One scenario is members of parliament put up police stations, police posts, and police housing, and the last regime, without public participation, collapsed some of these units, and I can attest some of those properties are idle without police officers, creating an extra exposure of risk to Kenyans involved in those areas. The new policy of, I want to find out from you, what new policy will you put in place on recruitment of police officers? With this kind of index which I started with about corruption, you can be assured during recruitment, corruption is the center of who will be picked. And last is, how are you going to refurb the air wing, police air wing department in the country, so that you can be in total control of it. We know very well the air services of the police were merged with KWS, the army, and the rest, whereby they were collapsed to something which we cannot understand. And I believe you have said that you'll deal with the issue of how to refurb the police. I want to hear what we're going to do on the police air wing. Last but not least is that we have officers.
Not right. You're entitled to one question.
Okay.
You are doing the fourth.
I'm just the last person. So let me finish with that. The police,
you are not entitled to that latitude. You read that. Time up.
Okay. It is only 1 minute, Speaker, if you indulge. We have quite a number of police officers who are graduates, who have gone to school, and their school, and we are aware that for them to move forward and get better remuneration, it was stopped. What are you going to do as the in charge of the department to make sure that we look at the issue of those officers who are graduates? Thank you very much. If I've offended you, Ichungwa, sorry.
You have not offended Ichungwa. You have violated the direction of the chairman.
Thank you, Speaker, because he's repeating questions.
Deputy Speaker.
Honorable Chairman, I just wanted to follow up on the same question that Honorable Murungaru said, and I think some of my electorate have said, why don't you assure them that you will have body cameras for all police officers who are going to be interacting with the public, so they're not collecting bribes on the road and terrorizing motorists? They said it's well to take care of their welfare, but the public want you to assure them that you'll also take care of their welfare against the police officers. And lastly, I think as someone who's been falsely accused in the past, I think you didn't get an opportunity to reconfirm that on the initiation, what had been said, to confirm that did you or did you not receive 15 million from NYS? I think it's important that that goes on the record.
I didn't get the last one, Speaker, Chairman.
I said you never got an opportunity to clarify the allegation that had been made by Honorable Wundanyi Opio. So I was saying you can use this opportunity to reconfirm that you indeed, yeah, because it was not confirmed properly.
Go ahead, Professor.
Thank you, Speaker. With regard to disasters, the Security Laws Amendment Act of 2014 made a lot of progress with regard to providing a multi-agency responses to security concerns. We have the country has a humanitarian disaster preparedness and response mechanism, but that has not been well anchored in the law. My objective is to make sure that the same is properly anchored in law, but above that to integrate the civilian interventions and responses to disasters with the security agencies, so that you have one comprehensive response which involves both civilians and also members of the security forces. With regard to alcohol, I think it's a national problem, as I have said. And I think instead of the top-down approach to the fighting of illicit brews, we may need to start conversations in the areas most affected by this menace of alcohol and drugs from the communities to help us generate the solutions, because in the past there have been very violent and decisive crackdowns on illicit brews and alcohol, and perhaps the results have not been very, very successful. With regard to borders and school buses, I am aware that the National Transport Safety Authority is working on policy on the transportation through borders, transportation of school children and the use of school buses, and also transportation of dangerous goods. And that can be a good opportunity for us to define what traffic police can or should do. But on the direct question of roadblocks, I think the issue of roadblock is an outdated policy of traffic management and policy. We should move towards the digitization of road safety management to ensure that people who violate traffic rules are electronically identified and are also electronically punished, so that you don't stop not just school children, you also don't stop not just border borders, but you also don't stop somebody coming from church with his family, and because of overspeeding, exceeding the speed limit by a few kilometers per hour, you book them in a police station until the weekend is over, when you'll take them to court. There are easier ways of electronically dealing with those management of road safety. So we'll be following up on that. And those spikes and whatever are things Kenya should move away from. They don't look good. They even are sometimes causes of accidents and lack of safety on the roads. With regard to the issue of area managers, it is my view, I believe, that area managers should be compensated for the work they do without affecting the budget, because again, the resource pass continues to remain the same and the needs are increasing day by day. With regard to the question of police people taking bribes, this is the lowest image problem we have in the police force. I'll take leadership in trying to ensure that the police are able to reclaim their position and dignity among the society. And we will take measures, both deterrent, but also through a reward system to ensure that it becomes, corruption becomes something that can be, is an exception within the force, by encouraging a reward system and a name and shame program within the force. With regard to prison services, yes, the reforms that we intend to do in the police service will also happen in the police prison service. And in fact, since the departure of the Honorable Mudia Warriors, Minister for Home Affairs, prison reforms have stalled. And this is an area which I think we require to be looked at afresh, with a view of making sure that these places become places of rehabilitation and correction of offenders, as opposed to places where people go to commit even further crimes when they are already in custody. Finally, with regard to recruitment, I want to promise this country and this committee that if I am approved as Cabinet Secretary for the Interior and National Administration, I will do whatever it takes to make sure that no Kenyan pays 1 shilling for their child who merits to be recruited within the police service, the prison service, and other formations under this ministry.
Thank you, Professor. Let me also ask you just 2 questions. The first one, Professor, is the integrity of the Kenyan passport. The Kenyan passport is said to be one of the easiest to forge. Criminals from our neighbors, our brothers from West Africa, and many others. As foreign minister, I encountered cases where there were nationals of Zambia, Guinea, Nigeria, all these countries, in jails, particularly in Asia, China, Thailand, where narcotic crimes are punished very heavily. And they are profiled and identified there as Kenyans because they have forged and are carrying Kenyan passports. what are you going to do as minister to enhance the integrity of our passport? Number two, in comparable jurisdictions, getting a passport is a right of every citizen. In fact, many countries like the UK, they don't have any other identification document other than the passport. In this country, getting a passport is an extremely tedious process. The people who queue for up to a year, 2 years. You want to travel out of the country, to get an entitlement of a travel document, you have to bring all manner of documents to prove that you are entitled to what you should have. What are you going to do about this? The last one is what you have just been talking about, roadblocks. And you and I have discussed this before. In 2016, I remember calling the then IG. From Eldoret to Bungoma, where I come from, is under 100 kilometers. And on one morning, I drove from Eldoret to Bungoma, and I counted 24 roadblocks. 24. Each roadblock is being manned by an average of 4 to 6 police officers. And you could see no crisis that warranted either those numbers at each roadblock or those numbers of roadblocks. I remember President Kagame of Rwanda asking President Kibaki to reduce roadblocks because businessmen from Rwanda were finding it difficult to transact their business by transporting cargo from Mombasa to Rwanda because of the number of roadblocks, which were also toll stations. What are you going to do to eliminate this menace? Thank you. And may I also disclose to the committee that the Honorable Nominee is a very close friend to me. We have practiced law together, and we research and write some things together in furtherance of the law.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman and honorable members, with regard to forgery of the Kenyan passport, the e-passport features introduced in 2017 September goes a long way in upgrading the security features and the status of the Kenyan passport internationally. Unfortunately, the uptake has been slow. Until now, only 1.6 million Kenyans have converted their old passports into the e-passports out of the 3.5 million Kenyans who own passports. The deadline has been extended, and under the East African Community Protocol, I think the deadline now has been extended to December, 30th November. But I doubt that even with that extension, there will be many more Kenyans because of the reasons, some of which you have highlighted. So this forgery issue, once every Kenyan has an e-passport, will be something that perhaps will be a rare occurrence. Mr. Chairman, honorable members, I believe, just like the chair does, that a passport is a basic identity document. In fact, every Kenyan should have a passport. And to this end, I believe also, in line with the Kenya Kwanza manifesto of a bottom-up approach and empowering people, one way of empowering people is to make people, even at the grassroots, empowered even to move out of the country for trade, for business, for whatever venture they may want to engage in. So I hope that we can move this 3.5 million passport to about 10 million passports in 5 years.
And it will help you collect revenue.
Absolutely. It's one industry. You are right, Honorable Chair, because this is one sector which government really doesn't need to spend a lot of investment in terms of resources, because it generates revenue for government. Number two, Honorable Chair, with regard to what we are going to do to make sure many more Kenyans acquire passport, we are going to increase the passport submission centers. Right now, there are about 7 passport submission centers. The intention is to ensure in the next 5 years, there is a passport submission center in every county of our country. Other than that, for Kenyans who live abroad, it is intended that we, subject to the approval of this House, will ensure that we increase the number of passport submission centers from the current 7, namely New York, Washington, London, Berlin, Pretoria, I think Qatar. We will increase from 6 or 7 to about 25 within the diaspora in the next 5 years. Mr. Chair, allow me also finally to say, however, the printing of passports must remain centralized. The submission of passports could have as many centers as possible, but the printing for purposes of security must remain, just like printing money, must remain centralized. And therefore, we will be empowering the Immigration Department with capacity to offer centralized printing services. Finally, on roadblocks, as I have said, Chair, I agree with you. This is a very archaic method where you put spikes. In fact, it's an obstruction of traffic. But you know, it's something we have gotten used to as a country for a long time. So you can't really blame the police as such. But we must move towards intelligent ways, and by intelligent I mean technology, intelligent road safety management systems, where we identify and punish road users who offend the law without necessarily causing obstruction or creating ugly scenes and traffic jams and accidents on the road. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Professor. I'll give you 3 minutes to tell us what you wish this committee to do with you and for you.
Mr. Chair, thank you for that opportunity, this opportunity to address this committee. I would like to say as follows. It has been the honor of my life to be nominated by President William Ruto to serve as Cabinet Secretary for the Interior and National Administration. I remain grateful to him, and I also remain grateful to my party, through which I have grown in my career in public service. I do understand the current assignment requires me to abstain from active politics unless I am propagating government policy. That is what the law provides. I therefore want to take the opportunity to assure the President and the people of Kenya I will serve diligently, I will serve with integrity, and I'll apply my mind, my energies to try and resolve national security challenges that affect our homeland today, some of which have been discussed in this meeting. I also want to say that I will serve with integrity and fight within my ministry any efforts to divert public funds, misuse public funds, misuse public human resources for political or other considerations. I also promise this House I'll cooperate with Parliament and other institutions of state to serve Kenyans. Finally, if I am approved, I'll remain grateful to this House for the opportunity, and I promise I will not let Kenya down. I'll do my best for the country, and this is a solemn promise before God, before the President, before government, and before my fellow citizens. If you approve me, you will get value for that decision. Thank you, Honorable Chair. God bless Kenya, and God bless you.
Thank you, Professor. You are now released to go to your other duties, and God bless you too. I give you 5 minutes break, health break. 5 minutes